The newsroom hummed with an electric tension, the kind that lingered in the air like the static before a storm. Bright fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the pristine glass desks, while the whir of camera equipment filled the hushed space. Beyond the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan high-rise, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, people rushing through the streets below, oblivious to the media maelstrom brewing above them. Inside Freedom Now Studios, one of America's most watched left-leaning networks, the air smelled of burnt coffee and expensive cologne. Producers whispered frantically into earpieces, adjusting their scripts, exchanging nervous glances. Something big was about to go down, and everyone in the newsroom knew it. At the center of it all sat Ethan Caldwell, the network's golden boy. A seasoned liberal TV host with a reputation for being both fearless and provocative, Ethan had spent years building his empire. Sharp suits, sharper rhetoric, he thrived on controversy. The flashing, on-air sign meant power, and he wielded it with surgical precision. From fiery debates to scathing monologues, he was a progressive warrior, unafraid to skewer conservative politicians and policies. But tonight, something was different. Ethan sat at his desk, his usual smirk replaced by something unreadable. His co-hosts, including veteran journalist Melissa Whitaker, exchanged wary glances. The teleprompter rolled forward, displaying words that would soon send shockwaves through the nation. Then came the moment. With millions watching, Ethan leaned forward, eyes glinting under the studio lights. His next words would change everything. And in less than 24 hours, they would cost him his job. What had he said? And why had it been so explosive that even his own network turned against him? Ethan Caldwell had delivered controversial takes before, plenty of them. It was part of his brand, part of what made him one of the most watched liberal hosts in America. But tonight, the moment he spoke, he felt a shift. A tangible crack in the foundation he had built his career on. And let's be honest, Karoline Leavitt represents the real problem in modern politics, Ethan declared, his voice sharp, slicing through the silence of the studio. This isn't just about policy disagreements. It's about people like her, young, ambitious conservatives who are using their platforms to drag this country backward under the guise of American values. The words left his mouth, and immediately, a ripple passed through the control room. Producers stiffened. A few assistants exchanged uneasy glances. His co-host, Melissa Whitaker, hesitated, shifting in her chair. Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but ignored it. He was riding the momentum, fueled by years of passionate rhetoric. She's not just a commentator, he continued, voice growing in intensity. She's a danger to the progress we've fought for. And let's not pretend, when someone like Karoline Leavitt speaks, she's not just representing herself. She's a mouthpiece for an ideology that wants to strip away rights, silence opposition, and roll back every social advancement we've made in the last 50 years. Then, the moment that changed everything. She's the kind of person who, in another era, would have been standing at the front lines of oppression, maybe not with a gavel, but certainly with a smile and a press pass, justifying every injustice under the banner of tradition. The words lingered in the air like gunpowder. A few beats of silence. Then, a barely audible voice in his earpiece. Cut to commercial. The red live indicator above the camera flickered off. The broadcast faded into a generic ad for insurance. And suddenly, the newsroom wasn't silent anymore. A storm erupted. What the hell was that, Ethan? A producer, Gregory Lasky, stormed toward the set, his normally calm demeanor cracked wide open. You just implied she'd be, what? Supporting segregation? Authoritarianism? Are you out of your mind? Ethan scoffed. Oh, come on, Greg. You know what I meant. No, I don't know what you meant, Greg shot back. And neither will half of our viewers. Do you have any idea how this is going to play out? Melissa shifted uncomfortably beside him, lowering her voice. Ethan, I think you went too far. Ethan turned to her, disbelief flashing across his face. Too far? Melissa, you know who Karoline Leavitt is. She's not just another talking head. She's dangerous. She's a conservative spokesperson, not a war criminal, she said flatly. Ethan felt a familiar frustration bubbling inside him. For years he had fought against figures like Leavitt, politicians and media figures who, in his eyes, twisted facts and fueled division under the guise of patriotism. He had spent his career calling them out. But this time, something felt different. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he had stepped over the line, or if the line itself had moved without him realizing it. Greg exhaled sharply. "We need to talk. Now." Before Ethan could protest, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out. Trending number 1, Ethan Caldwell's shocking comments about Karoline Leavitt. His stomach dropped. His words weren't just being debated, they were being weaponized. Clips were already circulating, ripped from the broadcast and posted on social media with captions screaming "Caldwell calls Leavitt a segregationist," and "Liberal host makes shocking historical comparison." The worst part? Most of them cut off the full context. Melissa's voice was quieter now. "Ethan, this is going to get ugly." The pit in his stomach deepened. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he had just made a bold stand or a fatal mistake. The moment Ethan stepped out of the studio, his phone was already vibrating nonstop. He ignored the calls, but the notifications were impossible to avoid. Twitter was in flames. News outlets, both left and right, had already picked up the clip. The conservative media was running with the headline. Liberal host Ethan Caldwell compares Karoline Leavitt to segregationists. On the other side, progressive voices were split. Some defended him, arguing that Leavitt's brand of politics did threaten social progress. Others distanced themselves, calling his rhetoric reckless. Melissa trailed behind him, her heels clicking against the polished floors of the studio hallway. "You need to fix this," she said, her voice tight. Ethan turned on her, his face still hot with adrenaline. "Fix what exactly?" "Telling the truth." Melissa sighed, running a hand through her sleek auburn hair. "This isn't about whether you're right, Ethan. It's about perception. You gave them exactly what they wanted, a soundbite they can twist." Before Ethan could respond, Gregory Lasky caught up to them, his face red with frustration. He motioned for them to follow him into a glass-walled conference room. The door shut with a click, and the tension inside was thick enough to choke on. Greg threw his phone onto the table. "The board is already talking. This is blowing up faster than we can contain it." Ethan leaned against the chair, arms crossed. "Since when do we back down just because conservatives get mad?" Greg let out a bitter laugh. "This isn't just them, Ethan. Advertisers are calling. They don't want their brands associated with this kind of controversy." Ethan scoffed. "So we let them dictate what we can and can't say?" Melissa's voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Ethan, you know how this works. It's not about whether you were wrong. It's about what this is turning into. The network isn't going to protect you from this storm." That landed like a punch to the gut. For years, Ethan had been one of the network's biggest stars. He had taken risks before, pushed boundaries. And the network had always stood by him. But this time, the network wasn't shielding him. It was distancing itself. Greg's voice was firm. "There's only one way out of this clean, Ethan. You issue a statement. Clarify that you misspoke, that you didn't mean to compare her to segregationists, just to the dangers of regressive politics. Damage control." Ethan stared at him. "You want me to apologize?" Greg nodded. "Not exactly. Just walk it back. Show some nuance. Give them something to defuse this before it gets worse." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could do that. He could say that he had been speaking metaphorically, that his words were taken out of context. He could soften it, make it palatable. But something in his gut rebelled against it. "What if I don't?" Greg's eyes hardened. "Then you're on your own." Silence. Melissa exhaled sharply. "Ethan, think this through. You're right, but sometimes being right isn't enough. You have to be strategic." Ethan clenched his fists. Everything inside him screamed against backing down. He had spent years fighting for what he believed in, calling out hypocrisy wherever he saw it. If he backed down now, what did that say about him? Greg stood up, grabbing his phone. "You have until tomorrow morning, Ethan. If you won't fix this, the network will." He walked out, leaving Ethan and Melissa alone in the conference room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Melissa sighed. "What are you going to do?" Ethan stared out the window, the city glowing beneath him. "I don't know yet." Ethan barely slept that night. By morning, the media storm had only grown. Conservative pundits were calling for his termination. Right-wing politicians were using him as an example of liberal media's so-called hate speech. Then came the worst part, a leaked internal memo. Ethan Caldwell's recent comments do not reflect the values of Freedom Now Studios. "We take journalistic integrity seriously and are currently reviewing the situation." His own network had thrown him to the wolves. By noon, the decision was made. Greg called him into the office, looking exhausted. Melissa sat beside him, her face unreadable. Greg didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Ethan, we're letting you go." Ethan's chest tightened. "You're firing me?" Greg hesitated. "You're a liability right now. This isn't permanent. Maybe in a few months." Ethan let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. After everything I've done for this network." Melissa finally spoke, her voice quiet. "I'm sorry, Ethan." He looked at her, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "Are you?" She flinched but didn't argue. Ethan stood, straightening his tie. "You're making a mistake." Greg exhaled. "Maybe, but it's done." As Ethan walked out of the building for the last time, a crowd of reporters was already waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in his face. "Mr. Caldwell, do you regret your comments? Will you apologize? Do you think the network caved to conservative pressure?" Ethan stopped, staring at the sea of flashing lights. Then, for the first time in his career, he had no words. Ethan Caldwell had always believed in standing his ground. But as he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the relentless flood of headlines on his phone, he realized just how quickly the tide had turned against him. Liberal host Ethan Caldwell fired after controversial remarks about Karoline Leavitt. Caldwell's career in freefall, has he gone too far? Freedom Now Studios distances itself from ex-anchor's radical rhetoric. The words blurred together. He had spent the last decade building his career, his reputation, his influence. Now it was all crumbling beneath him. A buzzing notification snapped him out of his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "You should be ashamed of yourself. People like you are what's wrong with this country." Ethan clenched his jaw and swiped the message away. It wasn't the first hate text he had received today, and it wouldn't be the last. Then another buzz. This time from Melissa. "Melissa, call me. Now." Ethan hesitated, then sighed and pressed dial. She picked up immediately. "You're trending again." Ethan scoffed. "Tell me something I don't know." "I mean really trending." She sent him a link. He clicked it, and his blood ran cold. Karoline Leavitt had responded. A video was circulating, showing Leavitt sitting in a cozy, book-lined office, speaking directly to the camera with the calm confidence of someone who knew they had already won. "I was shocked and disappointed to hear Ethan Caldwell's comments about me last night. Not just because they were offensive and inaccurate, but because they reflect a growing trend in our media, a trend where honest conservatives, especially young women like myself, are demonized simply for holding traditional values." She paused, shaking her head slightly. "This isn't about politics anymore. This is about decency. And it's clear that some people in the media have forgotten what that means." The video ended. Ethan stared at his phone, his grip tightening. Melissa's voice was urgent. "She's framing herself as the victim, Ethan. And it's working. Even people who don't agree with her politically are saying you crossed the line." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Of course they are." Melissa hesitated. "Ethan, you need to respond. But carefully." A long silence stretched between them. For the first time, Ethan realized he had two choices. He could apologize. He could put out a statement, walk back his comments, and try to rebuild his career. Maybe, in time, the network would take him back. Maybe he could recover from this. Or he could double down. He could refuse to backpedal, refuse to let Leavitt and her supporters twist his words. He could fight back, louder than before. But if he did that, there would be no coming back. Melissa spoke again, softer this time. Ethan, whatever you choose, I just hope it's your choice. Not your ego's. Ethan let her words sink in. Then slowly he made up his mind. The next morning, Ethan sat in front of his webcam. No fancy studio. No producers. Just him, a dimly lit room, and his thoughts. He hit record. He exhaled. Then he spoke. Over the last 24 hours, I've watched my words be twisted and weaponized. I've been called unhinged. Radical. I've been told I should apologize, that I should walk back my comments. But here's the thing. He leaned forward. I'm not going to. His voice was steady, controlled. What I said about Karoline Leavitt wasn't about her as a person, it was about the larger movement she represents. A movement that disguises itself as patriotism while actively working to strip away the rights of millions of Americans. I won't apologize for calling that out. He let the words settle before continuing. But I will acknowledge something. In my anger, I let my emotions take over. And for that, I will do better. Because if we want to win this fight, we have to be better than them. The real danger isn't just Karoline Leavitt. It's the system that empowers voices like hers while silencing voices like mine. The same system that fired me because I refused to soften the truth. He met the camera's gaze. I won't be silent. And if you're watching this, I hope you won't be either. He pressed upload. And then he waited. Within hours, the video went viral. Liberals hailed him as a truth teller, a martyr for free speech. Conservatives called him reckless, dangerous. The network released another statement, fully severing ties with him. But something else happened, something Ethan hadn't expected. His own audience grew. Thousands of messages flooded in, people saying they respected his courage, that they were tired of seeing the media bow to pressure. A prominent independent journalist reached out, offering him a guest spot on their show. A major online platform offered him a deal to start his own independent program. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't just another voice in the media machine. He was free. And he had no intention of staying silent. The backlash was immediate. Conservative media doubled down, calling Ethan a radical leftist extremist, and warning that his rhetoric was dangerous. Some mainstream outlets remained neutral, carefully dissecting his words without taking a stance. Meanwhile, progressive figures were split. Some rallied behind him, praising his courage, while others distanced themselves, wary of aligning with someone too controversial. But none of that mattered now. Ethan wasn't playing their game anymore. The video he had posted continued to spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views within hours. His inbox was flooded. Messages of support, offers for interviews, even inquiries from independent networks looking to collaborate. Then came the offer he hadn't expected. Melissa called him late that evening. Her voice was unreadable. You need to see this. She forwarded an email. Ethan opened it, his pulse quickening. Subject: Proposal for Independent Platform Partnership. From Open Discourse Media. Ethan scanned the message, his eyes catching on the key points. A fully funded independent show. Complete editorial freedom. No corporate oversight. A six-figure signing bonus. He exhaled slowly. Melissa's voice pulled him back. This is real, Ethan. They want you to launch your own platform. Ethan rubbed his forehead. So I go from being a network anchor to running a podcast? Melissa let out a dry laugh. Joe Rogan did it. Tucker Carlson did it. Independent media is the future, Ethan. You can say whatever the hell you want, and no one can fire you for it. He hesitated. Part of him still felt the sting of everything he had lost. The prestige, the network backing, the influence. But then he thought about the last 24 hours. About how, for the first time in years, he had spoken his mind without censoring himself for ratings or corporate interests. And people had listened. Maybe this wasn't the end of his career. Maybe it was a new beginning. Meanwhile, at Freedom Now Studios, the chaos hadn't settled. Gregory Lasky, the same executive who had fired Ethan, was now dealing with the consequences. The network's move to cut ties with Ethan had backfired in unexpected ways. Progressive viewers were furious, accusing the network of caving to conservative pressure. Some boycotted the channel, unsubscribing and flooding their social media with criticism. Ratings for Ethan's former show had plummeted overnight, with viewers rejecting the replacement host. Even some advertisers, worried about appearing spineless, started reconsidering their partnerships. Greg knew damage control was needed. At an emergency board meeting, he sighed, rubbing his temples. "We should have waited. The fallout is worse than the controversy." One executive spoke up. "Is there a way to bring him back?" Greg hesitated. "Maybe, but it's too late now. He's already moving on." They had miscalculated. And now they were paying for it. Melissa sat at her desk, staring at her resignation letter. She had spent years climbing the ranks at Freedom Now Studios. She had fought for credibility, for influence. But after what had happened to Ethan, she saw the truth. The network was only loyal when it was convenient. She had tried to warn him, had tried to convince him to play it safe. But now, watching how everything unfolded, she realized something. Ethan had made the right choice. The network had abandoned him the moment things got difficult. If she stayed, she knew it was only a matter of time before she became another casualty of corporate media politics. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to call Ethan. Instead, she took a deep breath and hit send on her resignation. For the first time in years, she felt free. As the dust settled, Ethan stood at a crossroads. The offer from Open Discourse Media was real. A chance to reinvent himself, to build something on his own terms. But there was something else. Over the past day, countless people had reached out, not just fans, but journalists, former colleagues, even rising independent voices looking for someone to lead the charge against mainstream media bias. Ethan saw an opportunity. Why limit himself to just a show? Why not build something bigger? That night, he sat at his desk, pulled out a notepad, and started writing a plan. Not just for a show. For an entire movement. 2 months later, Ethan Caldwell sat in his newly built home studio, staring at the countdown timer on his screen. The red live indicator blinked on, and his heart pounded. Welcome to the Caldwell Report, where the truth doesn't come with a corporate price tag. His voice was steady, confident, unapologetic. The chat flooded instantly. Tens of thousands of people had tuned in. His audience was no longer bound by network ratings, boardroom politics, or advertiser preferences. They were here because they wanted to hear him, unfiltered, unrestrained. He had lost everything that night. The job, the platform, the safety of his position in the mainstream. And yet, somehow, he had gained more than he ever expected. He had built something real. After the broadcast, Ethan leaned back in his chair, taking in the moment. He thought back to that night of his firing, the anger, the betrayal, the fear of losing everything. At the time, it had felt like his world was crashing down. But what if it was actually setting him free? For years, he had played by the rules, tempered his words, avoided topics that might make the network uncomfortable. He had convinced himself that it was the price of influence. But now he saw the truth. Real influence didn't come from corporate approval. It came from authenticity, from being willing to speak even when it was inconvenient. He wasn't just another disposable anchor in a media machine anymore. He was his own voice. And he would never let anyone take that from him again. Ethan picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages. Some were from longtime viewers, thanking him for standing his ground. Others were from young journalists, asking for advice. How do you build something of your own? How do you speak the truth in a world that punishes you for it? He took a deep breath before typing his response. Speak anyway. Even when they silence you. Even when they try to take everything from you. If you believe in what you're saying, say it anyway. He hit send. Then, he opened his laptop and got back to work. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was just the beginning.